After months of grueling work, Dr. Watson had finally made his way back to 221B Baker Street. As he stepped through the door, a sense of warmth washed over him, and he smiled as he saw Holmes sitting by the fire with a hot cup of tea waiting for him. Holmes looked pleased that his companion had returned at last after all their adventures together. With his eyes still closed, Holmes spoke suddenly. "Ah, Watson," he said in a low voice that was nevertheless full of feeling. "My dear friend, how have you fared since last we met? Tell me all the details of your work, and I will listen with great interest." He opened his eyes slowly and looked into Watson's intently, as if expecting an answer immediately. Watson shifted in his chair, glancing at Holmes with a look that suggested weariness mixed with gratitude. "It has been a hectic 2 months," said Watson breathlessly. His usually stoic face seemed flushed, and his eyes droopy from the unrelenting demands of tending to patients day and night. He'd been working tirelessly, but even so, there seemed to linger an underlying kindness as he spoke of his work. "My most recent patient was quite ill-tempered," continued Watson wearily, "but I've done my best to keep them comfortable." Watson inquired, "That's enough about me. How about you, Holmes? What do I not know?" With a wry smile and a glint of amusement in his eye, Holmes replied that he didn't think there was anything Watson could learn from him at the moment. "Since your absence, my days have been as languid and tedious as an old typewriter in the corner of a forgotten office. The only spark of action I've had was being assigned one case, which I'm still toiling away at with little success. Without your sharp mind guiding me through these puzzles, it feels like my efforts are in vain, and time is standing still." Holmes took away his pipe from his mouth and said to Watson in a confident but calm voice, "Take a wash, old friend. Have something to eat and get yourself ready for whatever fate has in store for us. I am going to have a walk outside if you don't mind." He pulled on the deerstalker cap he had kept nearby and began walking towards the door with deliberate stride, as if nothing could stop him now. As he watched Holmes retreat up the stairs, but deep down he knew his friend was right. He should take care of himself and get some rest. Perhaps a light dinner would help persuade him to stay in bed for once instead of gallivanting out at all hours looking for clues. It could do no harm to enjoy an evening free from adventure. After all, it might be weeks before any fresh mysteries presented themselves again. They heard it as a single, undifferentiated sound, like distant thunder. A moment later, a second shot echoed through the streets, and then there was silence, thick and oppressive until the third shot rang out. It felt more menacing than the others, like some kind of signifier meant to signify something sinister was happening outside their door. Watson rushed to the window, scarcely believing what he had just heard. Taking a breath and steeling himself for whatever might be awaiting him outside, he looked out at the street with trepidatious eyes. What greeted him made his heart sink. In stark horror and disbelief, there on the ground was Sherlock Holmes, surrounded by a pool of bright red blood that lapped around his body like an all-encompassing sea. In shock, Watson could only watch as several bystanders worked so desperately to revive their beloved detective while crowded around him anxiously hoping to witness. Watson sat in silence for a few moments, trying to collect himself. Then he spoke, his voice choked with emotion. "I cannot believe he is gone. Sherlock was not just a friend, he was a force of nature. The world is a poorer place without him." Lestrade nodded in agreement. "Yes, it's hard to imagine life without him. He was a remarkable man, a genius in his own way." Watson wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. What will happen now? Who will solve the crimes that no one else can? Lestrade shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe no one can fill his shoes." Watson shook his head. "No, there must be someone. Someone with his intelligence, his intuition, his... He trailed off, unable to find the right words. Lestrade put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find someone, Watson. We'll find someone who can continue the work that he started. We owe it to him." Watson nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Yes, you're right. We can't let his legacy fade away. We must keep his spirit alive." They sat in silence for a few minutes, lost in their thoughts. Then Lestrade spoke up. "You know, I always wondered how you put up with him all those years. He could be so... difficult." Watson smiled faintly. "Yes, he could be. But he was also kind and brave and loyal, and he was never afraid to speak his mind no matter what others thought of him. Lestrade nodded thoughtfully. Yes, he certainly had a unique way of looking at the world. Watson chuckled softly. That's one way of putting it. They fell silent again, both lost in their memories of their dear friend. After a few moments, Watson spoke up again. Do you remember the time we went to investigate the case of the missing ruby? Lestrade smiled. How could I forget? We were all so sure we had cracked the case, and then he came in and showed us how wrong we were. Watson chuckled. Yes, he had a way of making us feel foolish sometimes, but he was always right in the end. Lestrade nodded. That's the thing about him, he was always right. They sat in silence for a few more minutes, lost in their memories. Finally, Watson stood up. I should be going. There are arrangements to be made. Lestrade stood up as well. Of course. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Watson nodded. Thank you, Lestrade. I appreciate it. They shook hands, then Watson made his way out of the room. As he walked down the hall, he felt a sudden pang of sadness. It was over. Sherlock Holmes was truly gone, and nothing could bring him back. But even as he mourned his friend, he knew that the work they had done together would live on. The legacy of Sherlock Holmes would never die.